the grave, heed my call. In life, we suffered unspeakable tragedies. We watched as our homes were razed to the ground. We cried out in agony as our families were cut down before our eyes. Finally, in the face of such atrocities, we were denied even the release of death. To those who would question our place in this world, we are not monsters. We are not the mindless wretches of a ghoul army. No, we are a force even more terrifying. We are a chill in a coward's spine. We are the instruments of an unyielding ire. We are the Forsaken.
Hello guys, this is Doronsmovies, and today I got another World of Warcraft RP guide. So today I'll be guiding you on how to roleplay as a Forsaken in the game. So we'll go over a few points, most importantly some basic lore and how the undead got to where they are at this point. I will also give you a quick insight into their culture, traditions, and all that stuff. And finally, I'll present you with some guideline personalities and classes that you can pick or play with. So without further ado, let's just get into some of the lore. Now, unlike the previous races we covered, the Forsaken really don't have all that much lore, and they're fairly a newer race, if they can even be called a race after all. I mean, they were first created during the Third War, so I believe that's around 15-20 years back from this point. That was around 5 years before World of Warcraft. Now, most of the current Forsaken were created by the initial plague that was with Scourge and all of that started quite unexpectedly. Now, Kel'Thuzad was a corrupted Elven wizard, and his cult of the Dam started secretly infiltrating and spreading the new plague one step at a time. Now, the poison itself is called the Plague of Undeath, and the sole purpose is to raise dead humans and turn them into these warriors of the Scourge. And at the time, I mean, it was a perfect plan, because every time you kill a soldier, the Scourge would get one, so they would just spread so quickly, so the more they kill, the more they get, which was perfect for them. Now, after the corruption of Arthas and his initiation as a Death Knight, Kol'Thelas was invaded with the help of a traitor from the inside, and fast enough the Scourge destroyed the entire Elven kingdom, killing more than 90% of the population. Now, their goal was the Sunwell, however they did destroy everything in their path, and one of the unlucky victims was Sylvanas Windrunner, the Ranger General of the High Elves. She kept quite a resistance against the Scourge on every turn, and that kinda pissed off Arthas, and when he was actually supposed to kill her, he didn't give her a clean death, thus raising her as a bench that would serve him in death. And so she did for a time, but then Arthas started getting weaker and weaker, and the stronger minded servants, such as the Sylvanas, managed to break free from his will. Now, alongside her joined her banshees and all of the undead that actually managed to break themselves free, and usually those undead that broke with the first were the strongest minded ones, and thus the first Forsaken were created. Now, while Arthas was getting to the throne in Northrend, Sylvanas and her Forsaken took over the fallen kingdom of Lordran and formed their first capital, Undercity. Now, after some time, they managed to get rid of most of the Scourge from the Eastern Kingdoms, thus isolating the Scourge to the far north, all the way in Northrend. And that is how they came to be the Forsaken as they are today. However, they are humans on the same continent, and they weren't so happy about the undead being near their borders and occupying their fallen kingdom, and also the Scourge was trying to get a foothold as well. So, left with no choice, Sylvanas had to search for some allies, and she contacted many factions, and she actually managed to get a hold of the Tauren, who convinced Troll to allow them to join, and the deal was kinda mutually beneficial, as the Forsaken would get the help they need and the reinforcements in order to defend themselves, while the Horde would get a foothold in the Eastern Kingdom, establishing a major base on the same continent as their sworn enemies, the Alliance. So that is pretty much all there is for their story. Of course, a few things happened during the past few expansions, although those things didn't really make too much of a difference in their story if you plan to make a backstory. Although I guess it is worth mentioning that they use the Valkyries to resurrect corpses, and they also use necromancy to keep their undead bodies functioning so they don't completely deteriorate. And the fact that they recently started working on a new plague that they used against humans around the time of Cataclysm. But if you plan to RP a Forsaken, this is about how much story you need in order to get some basic backstory and all of that. Now let's get a quick look into their culture and their way of life. Now they're a very unique race, and unlike other races, their values are kinda different. I mean, they don't really care too much about the nature or the elements or any other like godly force or such a thing. So they mostly care only about themselves and are generally quite depressed, sarcastic, and generally not in really a good mood. It is very rare like if you meet an undead that is extremely happy about being alive, even though their living form is a bit more complex. And as you could probably tell, their life is based on death, and that is kind of the main focus of everything. I mean, all of the Forsaken places are dark, and they generally don't really care too much about aesthetics and how their homes look like, art and all of that stuff. Now, they also mostly sleep in coffins or beds designed to look like coffins. However, there are a few exceptions, and you can always sleep in like a regular bed if you wanted to. I mean, a lot of Forsaken do that, even though some prefer to sleep in coffins. Now, they also have different outlooks on how they died, so some may be happy about it and see it as a second chance, while others may see it as a bad thing and start hating themselves for it. So it's mostly your choice, and I will cover more of this in the personalities section in this video. Now, when it comes to eating and drinking, we don't really know why they do it, and it's not really certain whether they actually gain anything from it or if they just do it for the fun of it. I mean, it is considered that since they are the living dead, they don't really have the basic life needs like food, water, or even breathing itself. They can also be prone to cannibalism and eating their enemies after combat and all of that stuff. And if they do actually eat, they will probably eat the same stuff they ate when they were alive, although that might depend whether they have their jaws or if they're even working or if they're even existing. Now, when it comes to their appearance, you can really have your hands free there, as there isn't really a strict design you need to stick to, even though the models are very limiting. I mean, they can be either as drastic as the ghouls or even have a freshy dead look like Sylvanas. This can definitely vary on how they died and how they actually turned into the Forsaken. They can often miss some of their limbs or jaws or even eyes, although they can also be attached to them as well. So the drastic example would be the Abomination, which is like a different mix of different body parts, I guess. Although you can't really play as the Abomination, you're kinda limited to the human models. Although you can kinda RP if you don't have like an arm or something like that. But as I said, you kinda have your hands free, so you can describe your character just as you want. And they can also have like bones showing, no skin in certain area, missing body parts, limbs, and all of that stuff. So whatever you kinda prefer on that. Now, when it comes to loyalty, the Forsaken are very diverse in this area. I mean, most of them are very loyal to Sylvanas, but don't really care too much about anyone apart from that. I mean, they won't really die for the ideals of the Horde or devote themselves to it, and they kinda see their alliance with the Horde more of like a temporary thing, something that could change if their needs aren't equally fulfilled. That is kinda one of the reasons they made a pact in the first place, as I said earlier in the video, because they actually got something out of it. I mean, the help of the Horde in times of need, while on the other side, the other races, when you look at it, aren't really a huge fan of the Forsaken. Like, it's not like they accepted the Forsaken because they love them. They kind of mostly accepted them because they would get in a really good tactical position and they could have like their military operations there. And usually most of the races don't really like the Forsaken that much and they kind of just tolerate them. Now, when it comes to naming your character, it isn't really too complex. I mean, most of the Forsakens were humans in life, and they had a name before that, which they may use in that as well. Now, it mostly depends on your story and what sort of an outlook your character has on his previous lifestyle, but many Forsaken also like to change their name to something more appropriate towards the undead and their darker outlook on life, if you could say that. So, you can either change your name fully, or keep the first name and change just the last name. But generally, I would just stick to the human name, and if you want to add some of the undead things like flesh, bones, plague, etc., it would be really good if you could add something to your name that was as a human, so you sort of have like a combination between an undead name and a human name. And lastly, before I cover the classes, I just want to give you 3 drastic types of personalities that you can choose for your character. Although do understand that these are just kind of very vague guidelines that you can use and work from, although you shouldn't just copy them directly. Now, the first one would be the depressed one. Now, this sort of a Forsaken didn't really accept his undead quite well, so usually he would have like a negative attitude and would feel depressed about most of the things he sees in his daily life. He also hates everything that represents life, joy, fun and all of that stuff. Now depending on his views, he might also hate his allies, such as the orcs, trolls, tauren, etc. Or even hate his own people as it is. So if you want to have this sort of a character, remember to always have that dose of like the mental emptiness and depression when it comes to role-playing your character. The second one would be the Loyalist. Now this is one of the characters that kinda sees undeath as a good thing and as a second chance, and is extremely loyal to Sylvanas and the Forsaken. I mean, he can, but doesn't have to hate all of the other allies or be racist towards them, so it's kinda your choice. But mostly, he does what he is told, but you don't just have to be a soldier, it's just important to keep the principles and kinda work together with the Forsaken and towards like a bigger goal for your own race. And the last one would be the Cursed Ones. Now, this one is kinda different from the previous ones, although it's kinda similar to the first one as well, and he views the plague as a curse and he wishes to get back to his old life, so it's kind of like a split personality, although it's not really known how much the Forsaken actually remember from their previous life, although in a lot of cases they'll remember almost everything, so they might feel like they want to get back to their families or visit their old life, even though that is kinda impossible as the humans would never take them back, which kinda makes them depressed, so that is kinda why they're the cursed ones, because they see the undeath as a curse. Now, as I said, these are just guidelines that you should work from, sort of like drastic examples, and your personality will mostly kinda depend on your backstory, so if you're serious about role-playing your character, make sure to take some time and think of like a really good backstory and try to connect it with your personality as well. And lastly, before I end the video, I'm going to cover a few classes that you can pick and how you can roleplay as them. Although I won't cover all of them as that would kinda make the video really long, so I'm only going to cover 4 and kinda give you a brief description on the rest. Now, as always, let's start out with the Warrior class. Now, really nothing crazy or fancy about this one, and it can be roleplayed in many ways. You can either be a loyalist to the Forsaken and take on the ranks of the Dead Guard and fight for their cause, or you can be one of the paladins that were Forsaken but the light forsaken them, and now they're using their own weapon techniques because the paladins use the light but could also fight. Or even just a regular trainee fighter if you were like a villager in your previous life, or even something more exciting like a mercenary, because the Forsaken don't really value honor that much, so it can be a perfect role for that. Alright, next is the Rogue. Now, probably one of the best classes that you can play with as a Forsaken. As I said previously, the Forsaken don't really value honor all that much, so being an assassin or a mercenary would be perfect for your Forsaken character. You can also fight with the regular soldiers, but being a silent assassin might be the best choice to go about it. You can be either an assassin for the Forsaken, or you can be like a mercenary assassin, or whatever you value the most. You can even organize something with your guild and all of that. Alright, next would be the Warlock. Now, this one is a bit different compared to the other races, as the Forsaken do admire the Warlocks instead of hating on them and avoiding them like the other races. They think that the infernal magics and all of that demonic stuff are a really powerful tool and will work in their campaigns, all of their military stuff. Now, most of the Warlocks were mages in their human form, but took on more of like a darker path when they died, so honestly, I mean, they're dead as it is, so I don't see why they would care too much about taking the Warlock risk, as some Warlocks could turn evil or lose their minds and all of that. And the last one I'm going to cover is the Priest. Now, this one is probably the most questionable, as a lot of people don't really understand how it works. Now, most of the undead priests were priests or paladins in their previous life, but now it kinda works a bit differently. I mean, a lot of them use the shadow aspects of the light. However, some of the really strong ones manage to wield holy powers as well, but it's not ideal for the Forsaken, as the light kinda provides them immense pain, and every time they use it they get damaged. So it's best to stick with the shadow aspect, although it's kinda admirable if you use light. Although it's kinda rare, and when you think about it, I mean, when Blizzard designed the priests for the Forsaken, they kinda just added a class, but it was mostly meant to be played as shadow. So that is all I have for these classes. There are a few others I can't really cover in detail, for example the Death Knights. They're pretty much Forsaken that fell under Lich King 2 times consistently. There are also the Hunters, who are kind of like a newer addition to the Forsaken and aren't really that great in numbers. And there are also a bunch of subclasses that you can think of, like the cultist, explorer, raider, assassin and all that stuff, so you kinda have your hands free and you can even make up subclasses if you want to. And that is all here for this guide. Thanks for watching and I hope it helped you out in some way. Now remember, these are sort of just guidelines and things you can start from, and you shouldn't really RP exactly as these classes or personalities, so you should try to form something of your own opinion from this information, as that is pretty much the entire point of role-playing. Also, don't forget to leave some feedback on what you think, and also what race you would like to see covered in the next RP guide. And also like, favorite and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel a lot and keeps these videos going. Anyways, thanks so much for taking your time to watch this video, and see you in the next video.